because we are what? Spiritual beings having a human experience. So we are communion. We are the body and the blood moving together as life, going out into the world and sharing that, elevating that consciousness. Thank you, Celebration, and thank you, band. Thank you for keeping that going till I could get everything up here. All right. Whew. So you will see some props, shall we say. This month, we have been questioning some of the beliefs that we have grown up with as they pertain to religion. God, heaven, etc. So 2 weeks ago, we put God on trial. So if you were here, we were trying to determine if God was guilty of accessory to the murder and the violence that we have been seeing. And we found him innocent, correct? And yes, thank you. Thank you. Jeez. Let me ask that like a teacher. So we put God on trial, and we were seeing if he was guilty of all of the accessory to the violence and the murder that we have seen recently. Yet we found him innocent, correct? Yes, all right, there we go. Whew. All right. And then also last week, we talked about heaven. Because many of us, as we were raised, heaven was this far-off place, and we had to die to get there, right? But here in Unity, we know, no, that's not the case. Heaven is something that we live every day because we create our world, right? And so through Spirit and as a co-creator, we are able to create that. And so today, I want to kind of connect those concepts of God and heaven, but also now connect it to this idea of communion. And I'm doing this whenever Reverend Cherie asked me if I wanted to preach one more time before I head out. I was like, yes, please, yay. Because I'm a nerd, y'all. I am such a nerd. I love to study, and I love what the questions that I get from people. And so being able to provide some of those answers or be able to provide a path for people to explore on their own. And so communion is something that here at UCOH specifically, we often do around the Christmas holiday and around the Easter holiday. And primarily that's because of Christ. We're celebrating the historical Jesus, right? And so whenever we celebrate that, we have communion, because communion was instituted by Christ, or the historical Jesus. At least we'll take a look at that and see if that's what happened. So, and what also kind of struck me this year is at Easter, whenever we were doing our communion service, I had one of my deaf participants ask me. They were like, what is this? Why are we doing this? I don't get it. I did it growing up in church, like in the Baptist church, but I don't understand. What are we doing here in Unity? And so that's a little bit about what we're going to talk about. So what does communion mean in a metaphysical context? So whenever we are talking about the metaphysics, because if communion, okay, this bread and this cup that is filled with juice or wine, it's empty right now because we have new carpet. But if it's filled with juice or wine, it's supposed to represent both the literal and the metaphorical body of Jesus, correct? Body and blood of Jesus. But if metaphysics is the theology of God and the universe, spirit, the divine, whatever name that you understand and whatever name that you put with it, and if metaphysics means first causes or a study of what is outside of objective reasoning, then why do we do communion? What is it? So, the simplest explanation of communion is a religious context is the act of taking wine or juice and bread and consecrating it. So you see the pastor or the priest hold it up, bless it, say some prayers over it, consecrate it. And then we eat it together in the remembrance of Christ. Now, that tradition comes from Jesus himself, and you'll see why my air quotes here in a second. It's described in the Synoptic Gospels. Okay, so if any of you are familiar, I'm Southern Baptist, born and bred. I was a Southern Baptist preacher's kid, so I got my first Bible when I was that big, and so, but we aren't all familiar with what's in here. So it's divided into two sections, right? The Old Testament or the Hebrew Scriptures, and then the New Testament, which is what we think about when we think about the stories of Christ and the stories of his disciples and the teachings from Christ. And so in the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, okay, there's 4 Gospels, right? Does everybody kind of pretty familiar? Okay, so Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, because they're similar language and because the stories are similar. And so they're called the Synoptic Gospels. And so in Luke 22, we have, and he took bread, gave thanks, and broke it, and gave it to them, saying, "This is my body, given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way, after supper, he took a cup, saying, "This is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you." Now, another thing that is interesting, and why I'm doing this during a Mythbusters or during a, taking apart some concepts that we have learned, is because with the Christian scriptures, like I said before, sometimes whenever you get these translations, the words of Christ are written in red, okay? But what's also interesting is that those books were written anywhere from 20 to 40, or even 50 years after Christ died, after Christ was gone. And so it was people recalling Christ's words. And so some scholars will attribute communion to Christ directly because he was celebrating Passover. They were Jewish, right? Christ was Jewish, and so with his followers, they were celebrating Passover. They were celebrating the Passover feast because this was going to be, Jesus knew this was the last time that he was going to have that opportunity here on earth to be that teacher, to be that example. And so he gave them a new narrative, a new story, right? And that's what we do here in Unity. We have these teachings, we have these masters, we have these ascended teachers that give us this information, and then we get to embody it into the Christ that we are, and we get to raise our consciousness. And so that's what we're doing. Those are some of the pieces that we're doing as we partake of communion here. And so before we can understand what communion fully means for us in Unity, we're going to take a look at 2 Christian theological perspectives, because for the most part, communion is a Christian thing. There are some practices in other religions. In Judaism, we have the celebration of Passover, but it's not the same thing, Okay, it is different because that was the release of the children from exile from Egypt. And then we also have Islam, when they celebrate Ramadan at the end of their holy month of fasting, they break bread together as well. And that is oftentimes now in today's language, we call that the iftar dinner. And that is the time of communion with one another, of breaking that bread together after fasting and praying. But we have two Christian theological perspectives. And let's see here. I'm not good at all these buttons. All right, and so I told Grace that she was not going to have to sign Consubstantiation. So this is what she gets to say. All right, Vanna, thank you. So if you grew up in a Catholic household, this word may or may not be familiar to you. Transubstantiation is the idea that the elements, the bread and the wine, as they are blessed by the priest, become the actual body and blood. Okay? So that was my little kind of halfway sarcastic comment in my introduction to this week of, are we cannibals? No, we are not. But what I find amazing about that thought is that it doesn't just like become body and blood. It stays bread and wine at the same time. And that's what we are, right? We are spiritual beings having a human experience. And so it's that same idea. And then in most Protestant Christian religions, you are going to find this idea, this concept of consubstantiation, which just means with, right? The Spirit is with the elements, and so therefore it is still bread. Looks really good. And it is still juice or wine, but we take it in the knowing, and we take it in the Spirit, with the Spirit of knowing the example that Christ was for us. And we also know that in these traditions sometimes, taking these elements, sometimes we did it out of fear. We did it out of fear because we were told that if we didn't participate, or if we did it the wrong way, if we did it without asking for forgiveness first or without saying all of our prayers first, that we were going to be in trouble, okay? I'm really trying to avoid, we're going to burn in hell. Y'all, I got some wounds, right? We're working on them, and we have healed a lot, but unfortunately but that's one of the myths that we're breaking, right? That's one of the things that we're breaking here. No, yes, it is about the Spirit. It is about the intention that we take it in, but, it's not some punishment if we are off the mark, when we're doing this. Because sometimes communion for me is that chance to really take those deep breaths. And when I'm putting something in my mouth, and I'm feeling it go through my energy, literally. And then so I feel that, and it centers me back, and it reminds me. And it reminds me of the Christ that not only lives within me, the Christ that I am, but it also reminds me of the Christ that I share and that I want to share. And so our intention is important. Our intention, and even here in unity, our intention is important. So the bread and the wine are symbolic. Wait, okay, sorry. Okay. The benefit of taking Holy Communion is the acceptance of this Christ presence within us. And we celebrate within our mind and our heart. And so Charles Fillmore in Keep a True Lent reminds us. So this comes, Lent, as some of you know, is a 40-day process that starts with Ash Wednesday and then leads up to Holy Week or Easter. And so on the 37th day, it represents communion because it was 2 days before he was crucified. The man Jesus was crucified. And so he says, the benefit of taking Holy Communion is the establishing of the Christ whose coming we celebrate within our mind and heart. The bread used in the churches symbolizes substance, Christ, which we consider the Lord's body, a body of spiritual ideas. And the wine used symbolizes his blood, and blood is considered life, or the circulation of those divine ideas in our consciousness that will purify our mind and heart and renew our strength. It brings us forth into the abundant, unlimited life of God. So substance, we humans are substance. We're stuff, okay? We're stuff. We're made of stuff. But the really cool thing is we're made of flesh stuff, but we're also made of God's stuff. And so we are the substance. We are the divine ideas. And so we are the incarnation of God expressing. We have life-giving blood that runs through our veins, and coupled with breath that allows us to live, move, and have our being in this divine idea that we are. So in the beginning of this talk, I gave a simplified definition of what a religious perspective of the word communion. But if you were to look up in the dictionary, you are also going to find another meaning. And it's the sharing or the exchange of intimate thoughts and feelings, especially when the exchange is on a mental or spiritual level. And that, for me, in unity, is what communion is about. Okay? Now, you guys know me. I can't give a lesson without getting you involved and teaching you some signs, right? So, whenever we talk about communion, okay, and you'll see we're using 2 different hand shapes. When she signs communion, she's using an F hand shape, okay, communion. And then I've also seen, because in religious context, when you sign, like the sign of the cross, you use your 2 forefingers, okay? And so I've seen communion, because it's that blessing, it's that taking part. And so for this purpose, you can use either one. So you can make a circle with your thumb and your forefinger, okay? That's an F hand shape, and you put it in front of your mouth, and then you can make like a little cross. Okay, communion. All right. And what I like about it is that it's that exchange. I'm going to sign here. And so it's that exchange, okay, that exchange of ideas, okay? So for me, I feel like communion. It's communion. It's communion. It's, but it's a communion. So you can take, because your pointer finger, okay, and when it's by your head, okay, it's your understanding, all right? And then when it's out over here, it's someone else's understanding. But then when we turn them and our fingers flick out, We're sharing understanding. So the understanding that comes from my head and the understanding that comes from your head, and we are sharing, we are communing together. We are having communion together. So when we share those divine ideas, when we share, when we are communing together, whether we're taking physical elements or whether we're just sitting and chatting together, right? Because we are what? Spiritual beings having a human experience. So we are communion. We are the body and the blood moving together as life, going out into the world and sharing that, elevating that consciousness. So, thank you for today, allowing me to have communion with you.